If you think wealth in Canada is all tech founders and oil barons, think again. Because across the country, Filipino women have quietly built influence through community empires, political breakthroughs, cultural institutions, and companies hiding in plain sight. Let's get into this crazy countdown of the richest Filipinas in Canada, and stick around because the woman at number 1 is someone you wouldn't expect at all. Number 10. Narima Dela Cruz, the organizer who built a community empire. There's a particular kind of wealth that doesn't come from stock options or corner offices, yet somehow opens just as many doors. Narima Dela Cruz built that kind of capital. For years, she has been the connective tissue of Filipino communities across Western Canada. The person who can fill stadiums for cultural festivals, bring municipal officials to the table, and mobilize thousands around policy issues that usually stay buried in bureaucracy. Narima's ascent didn't begin with a foundation grant or a national spotlight. It started with small acts of service, volunteering at community centers, organizing cultural nights, and offering the kind of behind-the-scenes help that often goes unseen. But in Canada, consistency compounds. One event leads to three. Three become annual traditions. And before long, she was helming some of the largest Filipino cultural festivals in the region. These festivals are not just celebrations. They're economic engines attracting sponsors, municipal support, and partnerships that turn cultural work into real influence. Her personal story adds another layer of resonance. As an immigrant navigating Canada's multicultural landscape, she learned early how representation affects access. That's why she invests so much energy in leadership programs for Filipino women, not as symbolic gestures, but as strategic training grounds for the next generation of advocates, entrepreneurs, and civic players. Narima is also a trusted collaborator for local governments. When cities need cultural insight or community mobilization, they know she can turn out an audience, shape public conversations, and help bridge immigrant communities with Canadian institutions. That's a form of wealth often overlooked. Social capital with policy impact. But speaking of quiet power, the next Filipina didn't build her influence in community halls. She built it in an industry where women are rarely the ones calling the shots. Number 9. Sagredo-Hammond, a CEO in a men-only industry. If you've ever underestimated the HVAC business, Sagredo-Hammond is the kind of entrepreneur who forces a double take. As president of a long-standing Canadian HVAC company, she runs a business that many assume is blue-collar until they see the numbers. Commercial contracts, maintenance agreements, multi-unit service deals. HVAC is steady, high-margin, and recession-resistant. It's the kind of industry that quietly produces millionaires. Sarah didn't inherit her position. She worked her way into it, navigating a trade sector where boardrooms are overwhelmingly male and often generational. But she came in with a blend of technical knowledge and managerial discipline, turning a family-run operation into a respected local force. The company thrives on long-term service agreements, a subtle but powerful revenue engine, and her leadership has pushed it into broader construction networks, supplier partnerships, and community programs. Her background as a Filipino woman in a male-dominated field often surprises people. Yet she doesn't frame her career as defying expectations. She frames it as simply doing the work. That grounded approach is partly why she's become a fixture in Canadian business forums, leadership panels, and Filipino economic development circles. Sarah's story also has a mentorship angle. She actively advocates for women entering trades, not just for equity's sake, but because she knows firsthand that construction and home services can be transformative wealth pathways for immigrant families. In Filipino-Canadian communities, her message lands with particular weight. Stability can also come from industries people rarely consider. But from the hard edges of construction, we shift to something entirely different, a Filipina who reshaped Canada's cultural landscape using movement, memory, and the language of dance. Number 8. Beltran-Lucila, the artist who turned culture into institution. In Edmonton, there's an arts movement that quietly redefined how Filipino culture lives inside Canada's multicultural scene. And much of it traces back to Beltran-Lucila. A former principal dancer and later artistic director at Chameleon Dance Edmonton, She built a career that blends heritage with creative reinvention. Her wealth doesn't look like corporate balance sheets. It's the product of decades directing programs, securing grants, teaching, and shaping cultural policy through the arts. Ida's work is rooted in a simple but powerful idea. Filipino dance can be both traditional and contemporary, both immigrant memory and Canadian expression. She took that concept and built programs that wove Filipino rhythms into Canadian performance spaces, making room for diasporic identity on professional stages. For many Filipinos who grew up far from home, her productions were often their first time seeing their culture presented with artistic depth instead of tokenism. Her influence extends beyond the stage. Ida founded community arts initiatives that receive Canadian Arts Council funding, an important feat in a competitive sector. She mentors young dancers, helps integrate multicultural arts into educational programs, and works closely with nonprofits that promote diversity in the performing arts. Her leadership created a pipeline for Filipino youth to see arts not just as a hobby, but as a viable career path. Ida is also one of the few Filipina cultural leaders recognized nationally for expanding Canada's multicultural arts identity. For Alberta's arts community, she's both a creator and a bridge builder, someone who understands how culture can influence belonging, visibility, and creative opportunity. But while Ida influenced hearts through art, the next Filipina shaped something even more critical: public trust in the middle of a health crisis. Number 7. Dr. Denise Koh, the public health anchor of Manitoba. If Manitoba's health system had a quiet stabilizer during its most chaotic years, it was Dr. Denise Koh. She isn't the kind of public figure who fills a room with volume. She fills it with clarity. As Manitoba's chief occupational medical officer and an assistant professor with an active research portfolio, she sits at that powerful intersection where academic expertise translates directly into provincial-level policy. And that, in Canada's public sector, is a form of wealth. The combination of stable senior appointments, consulting authority, and influence that shapes long-term systems. Her success story tracks with a familiar immigrant arc, but Denise adds her own signature to it. She arrived in Canada with scientific training already in hand, but she built her reputation here, slowly, deliberately, and with the kind of intellectual discipline that earns trust in crisis situations. When COVID hit, Manitoba turned to her for calm direction. Her interviews became known for their steadiness. No dramatics, no jargon, just evidence and compassion delivered in equal measure. That visibility mattered. For many Filipino Manitobans, especially healthcare workers who form a huge portion of the province's essential workforce, Dr. Koh became both an advocate and a mirror of possibility. She advocated loudly for mental health support for frontline workers and quietly mentored Filipino medical students trying to navigate Canadian licensing pathways. Those relationships don't show up on resumes, but they strengthen a community's professional future. At the policy level, Denise is the kind of official who understands that health isn't just clinical charts and risk models. It's workplaces, immigrant realities, socioeconomic gaps, and cultural nuances that affect how people access care. Her work in occupational health, an area that touches thousands of workers across industries, gives her a kind of leverage that goes beyond press briefings. She advises institutions, informs provincial strategy, and carries authority that's both academic and administrative. And while Dr. Koh's leadership shaped workplaces and health systems, another Filipina stepped into a very different kind of arena, one where every decision echoes across the entire country. Number 6. Rechie Valdez, the history-making MP. Rechie Valdez's rise feels like a shift in Canada's political weather, the kind of shift that tells a community its voice is finally being taken seriously. As the first Filipina-Canadian woman elected to the House of Commons, she didn't just break a barrier. She rewrote a chapter of Canadian political representation. Her influence stems from more than her seat in Parliament. It comes from the compound effect of her entrepreneurial past, her social media fluency, and her instinct for translating community concerns into national conversations. Before politics, Rechie built her own ventures, small businesses rooted in creativity and digital culture. That entrepreneurial backbone now informs her work on economic development and small business advocacy. It also gives her a financial trajectory that differs from the traditional public through-line seen in Canadian politics. Where many MPs follow institutional career ladders, Rechie brings that hybrid profile: public salary, business ownership, and the long-term brand value that comes with national representation. But what sets her apart isn't just her resume. It's how she moves between spaces. One day she's in Ottawa debating immigration frameworks. The next, she's hosting live streams connecting with young Filipinos and BIPOC entrepreneurs. She understands something many politicians overlook. Representation doesn't land unless it's visible, accessible, and relatable. Her presence in Parliament is also symbolically weighty. The Filipino community is one of Canada's largest immigrant groups and one of its most economically essential, especially in healthcare and service sectors. Yet historically, they've been underrepresented in legislative bodies. Rechie's election altered that math. She brought issues like immigrant credential recognition, newcomer support, and cultural entrepreneurship into federal discussions with lived authenticity. Her influence is still growing, but already she stands as a marker of what political wealth looks like: national platform, policy-making authority, and a community that treats her success as collective momentum. And while Rechie carries her community's voice into federal chambers, another Filipina earned national trust through a completely different path, guiding Canada's biggest city through one of the hardest moments in its history. Number 5. Dr. Eileen de Villa, Toronto's steady hand in times of crisis. In a city as complex as Toronto, where public health intersects daily with politics, economics, and global mobility, stability is not a luxury, it's a requirement. Dr. Eileen de Villa embodied that stability during a period when every press conference felt like the country was collectively holding its breath. As Toronto's medical officer of health, she became one of the most recognizable public figures in Canada, not because she sought the spotlight, but because her voice helped millions make sense of the unknown. Her role is one of the highest paid and most influential public health appointments in the nation, a position that commands both the security of senior public service and the strategic sway to influence policy at municipal, provincial, and federal levels. That combination places her firmly among the most powerful Filipina professionals in Canada. But wealth, in her case, extends beyond salary. It includes immense professional capital, national credibility, and the enduring trust of a city that leaned on her during its most vulnerable moments. Dr. de Villa's approach has always been grounded in clarity. She communicates like someone who understands how people process fear, plainly, calmly, and with an analytical steadiness that never feels detached. It's a balance shaped by years of clinical training, public health research, and administrative leadership, but also by lived Filipino values around empathy, pragmatism, and service. Her public prominence brought something unexpected to the Filipino community: widespread visibility. Suddenly, young Filipinas saw someone who looked like them, standing at the center of Canada's largest city, delivering science with authority. For immigrant parents watching the news from apartment kitchens and grocery store break rooms, she represented a future they had always hoped their children could reach. Behind the scenes, Dr. de Villa oversaw teams, shaped long-term health strategies, and coordinated with political leaders under the kind of pressure that would flatten most people. Yet her demeanor never frayed. That reliability became Toronto's ballast, as well as her signature legacy. And while Dr. de Villa built her influence through institutional leadership, the next Filipina on the list took a far more global route, turning philanthropy, development, and international partnerships into her own kind of power. Number 4. Rochelle Atizado, the philanthropy strategist with global reach. If you've ever wondered how global development agendas actually move from idea to real-world impact, Rochelle Atizado is one of the people behind the curtain. But not in a quiet, background character way. She's a strategist in the truest sense of the word, the kind who can sit at a boardroom table with diplomats, corporate donors, UN officials, Canadian NGOs, and youth leaders, and walk out with everyone speaking the same language. That's influence. And in international philanthropy, influence is a form of wealth. Rochelle's career hinges on roles where decisions ripple across continents. As a senior advisor at the United Nations Foundation, she deals with portfolios that shape women's health, global empowerment initiatives, and cross-border development programs. These aren't short-term community grants. We're talking systems-level work that connects governments, nonprofits, and private sector partners. With every campaign she touches, her leadership capital compounds. And yet, her story begins from a place many Filipino immigrants recognize: starting fresh, re-establishing professional footing, and slowly carving out a niche in a Canadian landscape that doesn't always know what to do with globally minded talent. Rochelle didn't shrink her ambitions to fit the country. She expanded her reach until Canadian institutions naturally became part of her orbit. What sets her apart is this dual identity advantage. She's deeply rooted in Canada, invited regularly to speak at development conferences, university leadership talks, and philanthropy roundtables. But her work extends far beyond its borders. Her projects link Canadian funders to UN-led programs, connect youth-focused Canadian nonprofits with global development movements, and bring a distinctly Filipino sense of community-driven empowerment into spaces that often feel overly bureaucratic. Her recognition among Canada's most powerful women doesn't just mark personal prestige. It marks the emergence of a Filipina leader in a sector where few from her background ever break through. Her wealth, in this context, is layered: high-level advisory income, international partnerships, and a network of decision-makers that stretches from Ottawa to New York to Manila. Rochelle's story sits at the crossroads of diplomacy, cultural fluency, and strategy, a rare combination that lets her move comfortably between grassroots realities and global institutions. And while Rochelle builds bridges across continents, the next Filipina built something just as impactful: a media empire that finally made multicultural Canada feel like it had a microphone of its own. Number 3. Joycelyn David, the CEO bringing multicultural Canada into focus. There are entrepreneurs who build companies. And then there are entrepreneurs who build cultural momentum. Joycelyn David did both. As CEO of AV Communications, she took a small, community-rooted media shop and turned it into one of Canada's leading multicultural marketing agencies. Brands that once treated multicultural audiences as an afterthought now rely on her team to get it right. And that shift? It's a form of wealth most people overlook: the power to shape how Canada sees itself. Her rise isn't a flashy tech startup story or a right place, right time accident. It's the product of meticulous relationship building, sharp marketing instincts, and a deep understanding of how Filipino and immigrant communities shape Canada's cultural rhythm. While other agencies chased trends, Joycelyn built sustainable pipelines between corporations and the communities they once misunderstood. As AV Communications grew, so did its client list: major Canadian brands, government agencies, household names looking to connect with a country that's becoming more diverse every year. For Joycelyn, this wasn't just business scaling, it was cultural reframing. Filipino youth saw someone at the top of the media industry who looked like them. Filipino parents saw representation after decades of invisibility. And corporate Canada saw the value of narratives that had always been there but never tapped. Her wealth stems from multiple streams: ownership in a thriving agency, long-term corporate partnerships, and her expanding leadership profile in national business circles. She's a fixture in marketing awards, a go-to voice for multicultural strategy, and a mentor to young Filipino creatives who want to break into media. In a country where immigrants often feel pressured to assimilate, she turned cultural specificity into a competitive advantage, and a profitable one. But where Joycelyn mastered storytelling, the next Filipina mastered two worlds at once: healthcare and entrepreneurship, and turned that blend into serious professional clout. Number 2. Annaflor Feliprada-Patrizio, the pharmacist entrepreneur with award-winning clout. If you ask pharmacists what the hardest part of the profession is, you'll hear regulations, responsibility, long hours, and the constant expectation to never make a mistake. Now imagine doing all of that while starting over in a new country. Then imagine owning the pharmacy. That's Annaflor Feliprada-Patrizio. Someone who didn't just join Canada's healthcare system, she carved her own lane inside it. Before entrepreneurship, she spent over 14 years building a strong corporate pharmacy career. Then she made the pivot. Today, as co-owner of Schaumburg Village Pharmacy, she oversees operations, community health initiatives, business strategy, and patient care. A combination that is both financially rewarding and socially impactful. Pharmacy ownership in Canada is one of the most stable and lucrative healthcare business paths, and Annaflor built her success through both expertise and grit. Her story is one many Filipino healthcare professionals will recognize. Arrive in Canada, retrain, recertify, study harder than anyone else in the room just to prove you belong. She went through the University of Toronto's bridging program, one of the most demanding pathways for internationally trained pharmacists, and emerged not just recredentialed, but primed for leadership. Annaflor's approach to healthcare is distinct, patient-centered, community-facing, and rooted in accessibility. She champions medication literacy, supports older adults managing complex prescriptions, and ensures immigrant families receive culturally aware healthcare guidance. And mind you, this isn't a detached business model, but one driven through values. Her leadership ultimately caught national attention. She was named one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women, an award that signals both influence and long-term potential. Her wealth stems from multiple sources: pharmacy ownership, consulting opportunities, operations management, and her growing profile in Canadian entrepreneurship circles. But what truly sets her apart is her role as a mentor. New immigrant pharmacists seek her guidance not because she has the answers, but because she understands the battlefield, the exams, the licensing hurdles, the pressure to adapt quickly. She uses her platform to make sure the path is easier for those who follow. And now, all roads lead to our #1 entry, a Filipina who didn't just break into Canada's entrepreneurship sphere, but also became one of the few who redefined it. Number 1. Gelaine Santiago, the social impact CEO turned cultural powerhouse. As the co-founder of Cambio & Company, Gelaine Santiago stands at the intersection of luxury, heritage, and socially conscious entrepreneurship. And yes, her wealth stems from something far more nuanced than a traditional tech valuation. It comes from owning a mission-driven brand with high-margin artisanal products, deep international partnerships, and a loyal diaspora market that has turned her company into the premier Filipino luxury retailer abroad. But the real engine behind her success? She carved out a market that barely existed before she touched it. Premium, ethically made Filipino fashion crafted by artisans paid at global standard wages. The result? A model where cultural identity becomes a scalable business asset and where heritage elevates brand value instead of being used as a decorative tagline. Her story is the kind of quiet power that creeps up on you. Gelaine immigrated to Canada young, built her entrepreneurial skills from scratch, and transformed her lived experience into a business framework that now employs artisans across the Philippines, collaborates with Filipino designers, and serves a diaspora seeking identity through craft. When RBC named her one of Canada's top 25 immigrants, it wasn't just a trophy. It was an acknowledgement of how her work reshaped the narrative of Filipino global luxury. And make no mistake, this empire is Canadian to the core. Cambio & Company is headquartered in Canada, thrives in its multicultural marketplace, and fuels Gelaine's status as one of the most influential Filipina-Canadian entrepreneurs operating today. She's built an ecosystem where culture is capital, and every product sold deepens her economic and cultural footprint. And that's it. 10 Filipina powerhouses who shaped Canada not from the sidelines, but from the center of their respective industries. Which one impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments. And for more such peeks into the lives of rich, take a look at the channel.